Helmet's Meantime. 10 years later. A little over, but still. Yes, this, ladies and gentlemen, one of my favorite albums I've ever listened to, honestly. In fact, also fun fact, some of you who don't know, this is one of the cover albums where it's the red in there and the rest of it is in blue. But the version you might get through like YouTube Music or something will probably show the alternate cover where it's in blue here and the rest is in red. Which looks more like a little something like this. Yep. The start of this, I wanted to learn all the zeros. That's why it took so long, but unfortunately all I could do is the one that I was taught and learned myself a little bit years ago. Many years ago. My high school years, which is like, God, I'm old. Like, what? 2000 and closer to around 2006, 2007. Probably 2006, because that's when the guy who taught me, Ian Fisher, still doing his own music. You should check him out. But Meantime is one of the. Some people might talk about their earlier first record, though I just don't. My sweet spot for this band is more so like Betty, this and Betty. Betty kind of is the record where I feel like Limp Bizkit ripped off the tone of the band from that particular album. Helmet, I'd say what this record to me is this perfect balance of what they would eventually start to become by the point of Aftertaste, and that would pretty much become what Helmet, I guess, most, even though Helmet has essentially tried to, knows how good and how not only successful, but how well received this album in particular has been. And it's still one of my favorites from them. Not much for. I mean, you do have. For me, the bassist Henry Bogdan. And I mean, the guitars are pretty solid for what it is, but for the most part, the moments there were Bogdan and Stanier, who would go on. Stanier himself would go on to do a group called Battles. He's and has a weird thing with drums to where he has a hi-hat that's as high as it goes, and he just kind of hits it like that from here. It's like weird stuff. He doesn't have to do that with this group. Now, the band has been essentially Page Hamilton. It's been the Page Hamilton show for the past few years. And in fact, for the most part, they have done multiple shows where they've basically done, which I've yet to see, where they basically played this particular album in its entirety because it's that influential of a record. And low key, probably very influential to what low key, and my own opinion, and more of an IMO than an actual fact. I think this sort of unintentionally might have inspired a lot of like low key under the radar, a little bit of modern hardcore, a little bit, or at least what eventually some '90s bands would do. Sure, there's not like there's your other groups like your Hatebreeds, your Discharge, and so on and so forth. I'm just rambling on names at this point that have probably sound familiar to some of the more old school guys that like this band. In fact, it's more so between them and possibly Unsane. Hell, I would definitely wouldn't be surprised if Helmet's an influence to Ken Mode, for that matter. Granted, probably more Unsane or Melvins, but and Stainer to me is probably like the way this album is produced. Everything is very forward in the mix, perfectly. To me, it's most especially them drums. And every hit you hear from him, from Stainer makes it count. Like, if this album like inspired a bunch of drummers, I'm not going to be surprised, because he's one of those. Uh, and there are definitely the vocals that are very hardcore. From what he hears here, is very strong. Um, the basically the first four tracks out the gate, the pseudo title track in the meantime. Earth tone suits you, so give it a smile. If I could hold your feet down, get to know for the mile. To make do was a promise hard to keep without help. Never taught to look in. I'm too concerned with my health. Help me spread right ashes. Right, help you spread right ashes. Cow fertilized. Come down in a strength to minimize. Not sure about some of their lyrics, like most of the artists that were coming around that time frame, that when grunge was starting to come up, which they were in that pocket. Sometimes they do have that, but sometimes there are some interesting lyrics here and there. Some that may consider not hold up, and to me, it's more in the track Better. But Better, I think, is a good pit rager. Like over time, I used to not care for it as much because of certain lines in it. Though for me, it's like Unsung still has some one is like they're more known as a one hit wonder for the track on this record. Unsung, your contribution left unnoticed some association with an image. Just credit time for showing up again. Should wondered I'm left with it. Gone by sin too slowly. They can't pass it up. Then I thought nothing is right. I turned it off. To die on sun would really bring you down, although wet eyes would never suit you. Walk through no archetypal suicide. Suicide to die on is far too boring these days, which is one of my favorite lines. The favorite things, like especially when you're going to talk about something of a form of suicide, and yet saying, and I love how like die on is far too boring, like these days. Like that's just a line you gotta. Even now, at least that one holds up and is something to appreciate, given especially all the mental health and stuff. Your will to speak clearly exposed too much, unsung once too often. Couldn't. Granted, some of the way it comes off could not rub off. Some, as you've heard, the riff that I played from this particular project there. Ironhead's pretty good. It's got some good riffs. In the meantime, riff is pretty fun. Even the build into the verses, the chunkiness. I'm sorry for the dogs. Um, Turned out he feels bad has been great. You borrowed to me. FBLA 2 is one of the best sequel songs out there to me. And it's probably one of my favorite like. Plus, I drum like after so long going through this record, with her hearing these drums and not a drum solo, this track makes up for that. And the drum solo, sure, there's some drum solos that will not like compete with like Part or something. I get that, but it's a very for a band that's more punk and hardcore oriented, and with enough of a metal tinge, it's quite satisfying. The satisfying one up, like especially if you were already satisfied with the production and the way the drums come off as forward in the mix as they do, in the best way. It's not overbearing. Everything seems like I love the way this album is mixed. I'm trying to think who mixed this thing. Apparently, Harvey Weinberg mastered this thing. Oh, well, it was Andy Wallace. And I think it was I mean, Helmet themselves sort of produced it, but it seems they recorded this, or at least most of it was recorded in Fun City, but the track in the meantime that opens this was actually recorded in Steve Albini's up in Chicago, Steve Albini's studio, the same studio that essentially Nirvana would record their entire Innuendo in its entirety. I'm trying to remember what else Howard Weinberg was known for, but Andy Wallace was known for a lot of bands. And he's definitely up there as one of the bigger, better known ones, aside from Chris Lord. Alge, probably he's in terms of mixing. Um, but yeah, I'd say Andy Wallace did a great job mixing this thing. Um, Seeing this thing and the way Howard Weinberg mastered it as well. It's but though you could tell it's the production of its time, and maybe it could be remastered at some point. But if you get the right headset that can equalize everything out for you and stuff, and get you to hear it the way some of us remember hearing this with the CD and stuff. Yeah, this thing was a lot of good Riff City. The like I said with the FBLA, and then the drums just come in so well, and then you hear this like think Red Handed or something, then like kind of Sun. His vocals when he does cleans are more compared to his more hardcore style vocals. Page Hamilton's is his cleans have a very almost Ozzy-ish inflection, which honestly the way this thing sounds is like a weird blend of like the more crossover thrashy and the more hardcore punk elements of sludge that bands like Melvins did, or at least that more Sabbathy influenced hardcore kind of blending without quite going so too grunge or anything, even though they kind of have that element in there, but they're also sort of has the sort of mid-tempo groove syncopated thrash, but it's more punk crossover thrashy, more punky kind of blended thing to it that their specific alternative metal sound has. It's not too modern metal, not too grunge, too Black Album, or too grunge or anything. I'd say that for most bands that are in the more metallic side of like what is more noise rock, art punk oriented, did post hardcore, they kind of took the more metal route. Them alongside Unsane took a more metal route than what we got from bands like Fugazi, which is amongst one of my favorites that are up on my little shelf over there that you probably can't see on the screen. And You Borrowed has a good, fun little riff. Like you can understand some of the grooves and the way the riffs are done. I can understand being somewhat, not to the extent of Rage Against the Machine, but somewhat influential to them. And Page and Hamilton and Minji's guitars are pretty good here. I believe it's more in He Feels Bad If Not Turned Out. It's the like the bass between the bass and the drums before getting these clearly more noise rock inspired, more clamoring style guitars that you would expect out of like Fugazi, but clearly more metal meaty, more metal chunkiness to it. Yeah, Better has probably one of the best chorus riffs to me. It's like the I think yeah, it might be You Borrowed that might have been the one that I'm thinking of. That's the yeah. Role Model has a decent one as well, but for the most part, overall, clearly the first four tracks are. Let's Give It is one of the best ones. The ones and the whole self with confidence. Um, Killing hurts, has to beat on peace and love. And who's number one? The right to give. Learn to bleed, it's free. Pain is outside, lifted up to see. Step ahead, always wear the past, dying soothe me beneath the smell of grass. No world secret kept is too intent. Got my nerve from self-help confidence. And the shouting for the chorus of the for the with confidence. Probably one of the better solos, in my opinion, that they've tried to do, of the Eschewed style. Um, I apologize for my folks out there. They're probably trying to do some stuff, and I'm planning on at least recording this. Eventually, I'll get to the Torches, and that's my thoughts on this record. So, what did you guys think of Helmets Meantime? If you had a chance to listen to it, I hope you guys enjoyed it just as much as I still do to this day. I got into them because of bands like Chevelle, who also through them was Tool as well. Um, and yeah, uh, I never had a chance to get into them past Aftertaste because I don't think it would have been the same. I might have to eventually check those out, but for now I'll stick with the '90s stuff. That's seems to be the best stuff when it comes to them for the most part. And yeah, what did you guys think of this particular? What did you guys think of this album? Leave a comment below. Let me know if you've ever had a chance to listen to this thing. And do you guys have the red background, uh, blue highlight version of the album cover compared to my blue and red, blue background, red background font? Um, that's another curiosity. And also, this album went gold. I don't know if it eventually went platinum or not over time, but it's one of the bands. It's sort of a cult classic in its own right. And I think anyone who's had a chance to ever listen to this album was probably loved this saying. I don't know if they, I mean, their previous album, some people, even Deftones have like played like Sinatra, tracks like Sinatra and whatnot. But I feel like they were still working out the kinks at that point, and I feel like that this album was their perfection of that sound, to me. Um, and that it's probably why the track on Sun is more noted. But I'd still say check out their deeper stuff for sure, especially on between this album and Betty. Especially if you like the more no wavy, somewhat hip hop oriented stuff that they try to go more for in Betty after that one collab they did with. That some people say sucked. I liked it personally. That collab that them and why am I forgetting the band? I'm forgetting the hip hop group that essentially Everlast was a part of that led to the song "Jump Around." House of Pain. That's right. I like that collab personally. Some people don't. It's acquired taste, I guess, but overall, I like this thing. What did you guys think of this out? Well, like I said, what did you guys think of this album? Leave a comment below. Let me know. Um, I also eventually Torches Herbanocraft is one I'm going to be planning on coming and doing next. Um, that's had a 10-year anniversary. This one's had like been 30 years, and I still think it has its place in like in the genres for post-hardcore in being influential to not only alternative metal but also post-hardcore core and certain noise rock art punk based stuff in general, or at least the bands that are more noise metal technically, um, especially those that go a little more sludgier like Ken Mode or something like that. But also certain bands, hell, I almost would be and would not be surprised if somehow Knocked Loose were influenced by this record in some capacity. Maybe, but that's a bit of a stretch, I admit. What did you think? Leave a comment below. Let me know. If you like this video, rack that like button, thrust if you must. hit the subscribe button, click the notification bell. And as always, guys, keep it random, keep it real, keep it rocking, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care, y'all, and happy holidays. Hopefully you had a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. See you.